The alien race known as the Verai had always been seen as one of the most fragile species in the galaxy. Small in stature and gentle in nature, they were a peaceful people who thrived on unity and collaboration. Unlike many of the more advanced species in the universe, the Verai lacked the technological advancements that could protect them from external threats. Their home planet Verai was rich in natural resources, but their own inability to harness these resources left them dependent on other species for trade and protection. For centuries, this delicate balance worked in their favor until everything fell apart. The collapse began slowly. At first, the Verai noticed small signs of neglect from their allies. Trade shipments arrived late, and once friendly diplomatic meetings were rescheduled with flimsy excuses. Then, rumors began to spread across the galaxy about a new energy source discovered on the outer rim. Species that once saw value in maintaining relations with the Verai started looking elsewhere, shifting their focus toward new opportunities and leaving the Verai to fend for themselves. One by one, their protectors turned away. The once vast network of alliances the Verai had relied on for survival dissolved in the span of a few short years. Without the support of their allies, the Verai faced a crisis. Their technology was outdated, and their infrastructure, already fragile, began to crumble under the weight of neglect. Velorion's environmental systems, barely functional on a good day, started failing catastrophically. Clean water became scarce, food shortages swept across the planet, and essential supplies like medicine ran out faster than they could be replaced. The Verai, who had always been a peaceful and cooperative society, found themselves in a state of despair. There were no weapons to defend their borders, no soldiers to protect their people. Even their most basic survival skills had atrophied over the generations of reliance on others. They were a race on the brink of extinction, and no one seemed to care. As days turned into weeks, the Verai sent out desperate calls for aid, but the galaxy remained silent. Their pleas went unanswered, their messages ignored. The larger and more powerful species that once benefited from Velorion's resources had moved on, finding more lucrative opportunities elsewhere. The Verai were no longer useful to them, and in the cold calculus of the galaxy's power dynamics, they were discarded. It wasn't just the practical loss of resources that crushed the Verai, it was the emotional and psychological toll of being abandoned. They had trusted their allies, believed in the intergalactic promises of unity and cooperation, only to discover that those promises were hollow. The Verai had always been optimists, believing in the inherent goodness of sentient beings, but now they were confronted with the harsh reality that, in the end, they were truly alone. Desperation turned to disillusionment, and disillusionment to hopelessness. The once vibrant and hopeful society of the Verai was rapidly collapsing into a shadow of its former self. Amid the growing chaos, the Verai leaders tried to maintain order. They organized what little resources they had left, rationing food and water and making futile attempts to repair the failing infrastructure. But it was too little, too late. Without external support, there was only so much they could do. Disease began to spread among the population, and with their medical supplies nearly depleted, entire communities were wiped out within weeks. Every day brought new stories of suffering and loss. Families huddled together in makeshift shelters, clinging to the last remnants of hope, but even that was quickly fading. And through it all, there was one glaring absence: humanity. The Verai had once considered humans to be their closest allies, a species known for their compassion and determination. But as their situation grew more dire, even the humans remained silent. Rumors spread that humanity, too, had turned its attention elsewhere, focusing on its own struggles and leaving the Verai to their fate. If the humans weren't coming, then perhaps no one was. It seemed that the Verai final days were upon them, and they would face their end as they had lived peaceful, gentle, and utterly vulnerable. The situation had become a countdown to extinction. The galaxy watched from a distance, indifferent to the suffering of a once thriving race. There were no rescue ships on the horizon, no diplomatic envoys offering solutions. The Verai had been left to fade into history, a cautionary tale of a race too weak to survive in a brutal universe. But even in the darkest moments, there was a flicker of hope, a sense that perhaps the story wasn't over yet. The Verai clung to the belief that someone, somewhere, would still care. The question was who, and when would they arrive? Humanity had always been a wild card in the galactic community. Known for their resilience and unpredictability, they had earned a reputation as a species that often defied expectations. While many advanced civilizations saw themselves as coldly logical and self-serving, humans had a different approach. They were driven by a unique sense of morality, often stepping in to help those in need when there was little to gain. But even with their history of unexpected interventions, the galaxy wasn't sure if the humans would involve themselves in the fate of the Verai. After all, every other species had walked away. When news of the Veritai's plight reached Earth, it sparked a heated debate within humanity's leadership. The situation on Valoran was grim, and the cost of intervening would be steep. Resources were already stretched thin across human colonies, and they faced their own challenges back on Earth. But the question that loomed larger than the logistics was one of ethics. Could humanity, with its deep-rooted values of empathy and solidarity, simply stand by while an entire race perished? The Verai had once been friends, partners, and allies. Abandoning them felt like a betrayal of what it meant to be human. In the halls of power, human leaders argued passionately about whether to step in. Some insisted that the galaxy's indifference was a signal that the Verai were a lost cause and that humanity should focus on its own interests. Others, however, pushed back, pointing out that history would remember what they did next. The decision wasn't just about resources or strategic advantage, it was about humanity's identity. What kind of people would they be if they allowed an entire race to die, knowing they had the power to prevent it? Ultimately, the choice was clear. Despite the risks, humanity would not abandon the Verai. They would intervene, even if it meant going against the tide of galactic opinion. For the humans, this wasn't just a mission of charity, it was a matter of principle. The decision was made: a fleet of ships would be dispatched to Valoran to provide aid. The galaxy might have turned its back on the Verai, but humanity refused to do the same. When the first human ships arrived in the skies above Valoran, the Verai were in disbelief. By now, they had lost hope that anyone would come to their aid. For weeks, they had watched the skies, hoping to see the familiar silhouettes of ships from their former allies, but none had appeared. And now, when it seemed like all was lost, the humans had arrived. The Verai, once a proud and trusting race, had grown wary of outsiders. They feared that the humans might exploit their desperation, taking advantage of their weakened state, just as others had before. But the humans were different. From the moment they landed, they set to work. They didn't come with demands or expectations. Instead, they brought food, water, and medical supplies. Human engineers worked side by side with Verai workers to repair damaged infrastructure, restoring power to the cities and helping to rebuild the crumbling water systems. The Verai, still reeling from the abandonment of their former allies, watched in amazement as the humans went about their tasks with a quiet determination, asking for nothing in return. At first, the Verai leadership remained cautious, fearing that there was some hidden agenda behind the humans' generosity. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that humanity's intentions were genuine. The humans weren't here to conquer or control, they were here to help. Slowly, the walls of mistrust began to crumble. Verai leaders began to work closely with human diplomats and engineers, forming a partnership that would be the foundation of their recovery. Human technology was far more advanced than anything the Verai had ever seen, but it wasn't just the technology that made the difference. It was the compassion and empathy that the humans brought with them. They didn't just provide the Verai with tools to survive, they offered hope. Human doctors worked tirelessly in the overcrowded hospitals, treating illnesses that had been ravaging the population for months. Human scientists shared knowledge that would allow the Verai to become more self-sufficient in the future, teaching them how to harness their planet's resources in ways they had never imagined. For the Verai, it was a revelation. They had always seen themselves as dependent on the goodwill of stronger species, but humanity showed them a different path. The humans didn't see them as weak or helpless. Instead, they treated them as equals, capable of standing on their own with the right support. The Verai, who had once thought their only hope was to be saved by others, began to see that they could save themselves if only they had the tools and the knowledge. But the most profound change came not from the technology or the aid, but from the renewed sense of purpose that the humans brought with them. The Verai, who had been on the verge of giving up, found new strength in their partnership with humanity. They began to rebuild not just their cities but their spirit. Where once there had been despair, now there was hope. And as the humans continued to work alongside them, the Verai began to believe that perhaps they had a future after all. The galaxy had written off the Verai, but humanity had not. In the eyes of the humans, the Verai were not a lost cause, they were a race worth saving. And as the partnership between the two species grew stronger, it became clear that this wasn't just a story of survival. It was a story of redemption, of what could happen when one species chose to stand by another, no matter the cost. The humans had arrived when no one else would, and in doing so, they had changed the course of the Verai's future forever. As humanity's involvement with the Verai deepened, it wasn't long before the rest of the galaxy began to take notice. At first, the larger galactic powers had dismissed humanity's decision to intervene as a naive and temporary gesture, something that would fizzle out once the costs became too great. But weeks turned into months, and the human presence on Valoran only grew stronger. This was more than just a passing effort. Humanity had made a commitment to the Verai, and that commitment was starting to make other species uncomfortable. Jealousy, suspicion, and even fear began to spread among the more powerful civilizations. Some viewed humanity's actions as a challenge to the established order of the galaxy, a signal that humans were positioning themselves as defenders of the weak, something that could shift the balance of power. Others feared that humanity was using the Verai crisis as a cover to expand their influence, seeing this as a strategic move to control Valoran's resources. There were whispers in diplomatic circles, rumors that humanity might be planning to establish a foothold in a part of the galaxy that had long been left to the more advanced species. It wasn't long before formal protests began. Leaders from several major species sent warnings to humanity, questioning their motives and cautioning them against overstepping their bounds. Some went as far as to accuse the humans of meddling in affairs that weren't their concern, stating that the Verai were no longer a valuable member of the galactic community. If humans continued their interference, they would face severe consequences. The pressure was mounting. Even species that had no direct interest in the fate of the Verai began to align against humanity, wary of their growing influence. Diplomatically, humanity was becoming increasingly isolated. But for the humans, the decision to stay wasn't based on politics or power, it was about doing what was right. While the galaxy looked at the Verai and saw weakness, humanity saw potential. The more they helped rebuild, the more they could see the Verai slowly regaining their strength. The once helpless race was starting to transform. With human technology and knowledge, the Verai were learning how to defend themselves, how to maintain their cities, and how to organize a functioning society again. They were no longer the passive, dependent species they had been before. They were changing, and humanity was determined to see this transformation through, no matter the external pressures. As tensions between humanity and other species grew, the Verai continued to develop under human guidance. Factories that had once sat idle for years roared back to life. Fields that had lain barren were now being cultivated with human agricultural techniques, producing enough food to feed the population for the first time in months. Human engineers worked tirelessly to establish defensive measures around Valoran, helping the Verai build shields and early warning systems that would protect them from any future attacks. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about giving the Verai the tools they needed to thrive. But the galaxy wasn't willing to let this happen without a fight. A coalition of powerful species, wary of humanity's growing influence, issued a formal ultimatum. Humanity was to cease all aid to the Verai and withdraw their presence from Valoran immediately. If they didn't comply, there would be consequences: diplomatic, economic, and potentially military. The message was clear: the galaxy wasn't going to tolerate humanity's continued involvement. For humanity's leadership, this was the moment of truth. They could back down, returning to their own affairs and leaving the Verai to fend for themselves once again. It would be the safe choice, the pragmatic choice. After all, no one would blame them for retreating in the face of such overwhelming pressure. The humans had already done more than anyone else had for the Verai, and they could leave with their heads held high, knowing they had given the alien race a fighting chance. But that wasn't who humanity was. Walking away now, when the Verai were on the verge of rebuilding their society, would have felt like a betrayal of everything they stood for. The humans had come to Valoron with one purpose: to help those who had been abandoned. And no matter the risks, they weren't about to abandon them now. Humanity's leaders made the decision they would stand their ground. The galaxy watched with bated breath as humanity defied the Coalition's ultimatum. There were consequences, as promised. Several species severed trade ties with humanity, and a few even began to move their military fleets closer to human territories, signaling their readiness to escalate the situation. But humanity remained steadfast. The Verai were not just a mission of convenience, they were a commitment, one that humanity had no intention of breaking. The greatest test came when one of the more aggressive species, emboldened by humanity's defiance, launched a small-scale attack on Valoron. It was a test of wills, a warning shot meant to show humanity that their presence would not be tolerated. But the humans, prepared for such a possibility, activated the defense systems they had helped the Verai build. For the first time in years, the Verai were able to defend themselves, not as victims, but as a people standing strong with the aid of their human allies. The attack was repelled, and though the conflict was brief, it sent a clear message: the Verai were no longer helpless. In the aftermath of the attack, humanity's position in the galaxy became clear. They had chosen to stand by the Verai no matter the cost. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about solidarity, about doing what was right, even when the rest of the galaxy turned against them. As the tension between humanity and the rest of the galaxy grew, so too did the bond between the humans and the Verai. The two species were no longer just allies, they were partners in a shared struggle, united by a common purpose. Humanity had sacrificed much to protect the Verai diplomatic ties, resources, and even the safety of their own people. But in their sacrifice, they found something greater. They found a reason to believe in the power of unity, in the strength of standing by those who need help, even when the odds are stacked against them. The galaxy might not have understood it, but for humanity, the choice had always been clear. The moment of truth had arrived. With tensions at their peak and a galactic coalition poised to act, humanity and the Verai stood together, prepared to face whatever came next. The attack on Valoron, though small in scale, had sparked a turning point. The Verai, once seen as helpless and on the brink of extinction, had proven that they could fight back with the right guidance and support. It was a powerful symbol of resilience, one that reverberated across the galaxy. The other species, once confident in their ability to pressure humanity into submission, were now forced to reconsider their stance. In the weeks following the attack, humanity and the Verai worked tirelessly to solidify their defenses. Human engineers and scientists collaborated with Verai leaders to bolster the planet's shield systems, enhance communication networks, and develop strategic defense plans. It was no longer just about survival, it was about ensuring that Valoron could stand on its own in the long term. The Verai, inspired by humanity's unwavering commitment, threw themselves into the effort with newfound determination. Where once there had been despair, now there was a sense of purpose and pride. As the Verai transformed, the galactic reaction began to shift. Some of the more pragmatic species, observing the Verai's growing strength and humanity's refusal to back down, started to question whether continuing to oppose them was worth the trouble. Quietly, a few species reached out to humanity, offering to re-establish trade routes and diplomatic ties, though with caution. They recognized that the Verai, with humanity's support, were no longer the weak, disposable race they had once been perceived as. Instead, they were becoming a symbol of what could happen when a race was given a second chance. The galaxy's power balance had begun to subtly change. What had once been an effort to suppress humanity's influence was now transforming into a reluctant acknowledgement of their strength. Humanity had not only helped the Verai survive, they had elevated them into a position of self-sufficiency. This transformation made the Verai valuable once again, not just as a vulnerable race in need of protection, but as a potential partner in future galactic ventures. The other species, though still wary, could no longer ignore the growing influence of this once-forgotten race. Meanwhile, on Valoron, life was beginning to flourish. Cities that had once been in ruins were being rebuilt, their gleaming structures a testament to the combined efforts of the Verai and their human allies. Schools, hospitals, and markets sprang back to life, and the Verai, for the first time in years, could look toward the future with hope. They no longer viewed themselves as helpless dependents of other species. Instead, they had become active participants in their own recovery, learning the skills and knowledge that would allow them to thrive independently. For the Verai, this transformation wasn't just physical, it was deeply emotional. The shame and despair they had once felt from being abandoned were slowly replaced by pride in their resilience and gratitude for the humans who had stood by them. The bond between the Verai and humanity grew stronger with each passing day, transcending the usual dynamics of interspecies relations. It was no longer just about aid or protection, it was about friendship, respect, and mutual growth. As the Verai continued to rebuild, humanity's place in the galaxy also began to evolve. Other species, once skeptical or outright hostile, began to view the humans differently. Humanity had proven that their actions weren't driven by self-interest, but by a genuine desire to help those in need. It wasn't about expanding their power or gaining resources, it was about doing what was right. This earned them a newfound respect, even among their critics. There was a quiet but significant shift in the galactic order. Other species began to reconsider their own policies toward weaker or struggling races. Inspired by humanity's success with the Verai, a few species initiated their own efforts to assist those in need, though often with much more cautious involvement. The ripple effect of humanity's actions was spreading, slowly changing the way the galaxy viewed the concept of helping others. Where once there had been cold, calculated decisions based solely on self-interest, now there was a glimmer of empathy. The Verai's future, once uncertain and bleak, now seemed full of promise. They were no longer alone, nor were they dependent on the whims of more powerful species. With humanity's continued support, they had established themselves as a force in their own right, capable of standing alongside other races as equals. Their journey from near extinction to recovery was one of perseverance, made possible by their own strength and the unwavering belief of humanity that they were worth saving. In the end, humanity's decision to intervene had not just changed the fate of one race, it had sent a message to the entire galaxy. Empathy, compassion, and unity could triumph over indifference and self-interest. Humanity had risked everything to stand by the Verai, and in doing so, they had proven that there was another way to navigate the often brutal politics of the galaxy. As the humans and the Verai celebrated the completion of their most ambitious rebuilding projects, there was a sense that something far greater had been accomplished. The Verai, once abandoned and forgotten, now stood tall, ready to face the future. And humanity, though still facing its own challenges, had earned a place in the galaxy as a beacon of hope and resilience. The legacy of their actions would endure. The galaxy had watched, and it had learned. And in that lesson, there was hope for a future where no species would ever have to face extinction alone again. Humanity had shown the way.